So this is where we left off. We talked about waterlogging when the soil gets too wet, and then also salinization. So salinization is when we get too many salts accumulating because we're watering, we're overwatering. And what happens is when we water, some of that gets evaporated, and then when it's evaporated, it leaves all of the salts behind, okay? And it becomes toxic to plants. So one of the things they do in order to avoid this is they actually water at night, because if they're watering at night, then there's not as much evaporation. All right, fertilizers, write this down. So with fertilizers, we have two different types. We have organic fertilizers. So organic means it was alive or once alive. Anyone who needs a note packet? Anyone need a note packet? We're in chapter 11. So organic fertilizers are composed of organic matter from plants and animals. So think like manure, stuff that was once living. And then synthetic fertilizers are man-made, so they're produced commercially with the use of fossil fuels. And they take a ton of fossil fuels in order to produce. And I'll see if I can find something that we can look at tomorrow for that. But this is a picture right here on the right-hand side of the process needed in order to produce fossil fuels, or to produce fertilizers, okay? And it uses a ton of fossil fuels. So it requires a lot of emissions, right? Carbon dioxide, ton of energy. It also causes eutrophication. Anyone remember what eutrophication is? Too many nutrients in where? In the water. And if we get too many nutrients in the water, what does that cause? Algae, right? And then when the algae dies, that algae consumes a lot of oxygen, and then we get hypoxic zones or dead zones, okay, from that oxygen being consumed, okay? So fertilizers. We did not figure out how to make fertilizers until the Industrial Revolution and the Green Revolution. So pesticide, anytime you see the word side, it means to kill. So a pesticide kills pests. Now there's two different types of pests we have. We can have insects, or we can have weeds. Both of them are pests. You might have seen people spray an area like that. Typically they're spraying some kind of pesticide on there. So they can be selective, meaning they'll kill just one species, or they might be broad spectrum, in which case they might kill lots of different species, because it's pretty hard to target just one type of species that we want to end up killing. And the problem here is that sometimes we're going to kill some of the good organisms. So there's two different types of pesticides or categories. If somebody's really persistent, what does that mean? They don't give up, right? So a persistent pesticide is something that's going to stay in the area for a long time. Some of these pesticides take a year in order to degrade or decompose. And so that means a year that they can be affecting organisms. So persistent. One of the examples is that we're going to look at is DDT. Anyone ever heard of DDT? So DDT, we'll talk about, basically hurt a whole bunch of the bald eagles. And bald eagles almost went extinct about 50 years ago. And then we have non-persistent pesticides. They don't persist, and they break down really easily. So one of the biggest examples is just Roundup. Okay, you might have seen Roundup. It's a weed killer, and your parents might use it to kill weeds. Good. So here's what happened with the bald eagles. Okay, in the 1930s, there were 600 to 800 bald eagles. Okay, 1940s, we get DDT. And so we're using DDT on crops in the U.S. And DDT peaks in 1959. 80 million pounds of this applied. Well, it started having negative impacts on the eagles, and they didn't really connect the two for a while. In the 1970s, there were only 60 pairs of eagles found. This is in the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so we went from 800 to 60. All right, so the U.S. finally figured out, oh, there's a connection here, and they banned DDT. And so they've since recovered, right? And so now we have more than 2,000 birds. So what happened? Well, here's what happened. The DDT that was on the crops, okay, some of that washed into the rivers. Okay, so the DDT washed into the rivers, and it got absorbed into the fish. Well, bald eagles eat the fish, and so when they ate the fish, they were getting some of that DDT in their system. Okay, so DDT causes the shells on bald eagles to become really brittle, okay, or really thin, and they break really easily. So basically, all of the bald eagles, DDT caused the bald eagles to lay eggs with really thin shells, and so none of their offspring ended up surviving then because they had really thin shells. And who would have thought, because the bald eagles don't actually eat any of the crops where the pesticide was sprayed, but the pesticide was running off into the river, and then the fish were eating it, or the fish were basically absorbing it, and then the eagles ended up eating the fish. And so we'll look at that a little bit more too in 2 units from now when we talk about how these affect our nervous system and how they affect different populations. So pesticides, like I said, they can be one of 2 things. They can target insects. Insects are pests. Or weeds. Weeds are pests. So insecticides target insects. Herbicides target weeds. So let me talk about, you don't need to write anything about these paragraphs here, but the 2 biggest herbicides, so weed killers, okay? First one is glyphosate. You probably haven't heard of glyphosate, but if you've heard of Roundup, this is the active ingredient in Roundup. So Roundup contains glyphosate, okay? And most of the herbicide used in the U.S. is Roundup. Okay, and it has some health risks. The other one, the second most common one, is called atrazine. And atrazine is an endocrine disruptor. Anyone know what your endocrine system does? It's your hormones, okay? So your endocrine system deals with your hormones. So it's a disruptor, and it's linked to feminization in amphibians. So what does that mean? Well, male amphibians, when they're exposed to this, turn into females. Yep, they grow female parts. So here's a frog that's been exposed. He has ovaries and testes. Okay, they've done experiments where they've taken frogs that are males, they've put them in high concentrations, they literally turn into females. Now, you might be like, well, so what? Well, guess what? Atrazine is found in large concentrations in a lot of our drinking water. So you're drinking it. Is that a problem? You tell me. We haven't done any studies on humans because I don't know about you, but I don't know about any humans that are willing to undergo feminization voluntarily with unknown risks. Okay? So where is atrazine used? Most common use is where there's a lot of agriculture. Okay? In the Midwest. So yeah, there's a lot of risks. We're putting chemicals on these plants and we don't really know what they do, or we figure out what they do later, but it's hard to get them banned. Okay? All right, advantages. Write this down. Advantages of pesticides. Increase yield and increase profit. So if I don't have a ton of like caterpillars and insects eating my crops, then I'm going to have a higher yield. Okay? And then I'm going to make more money. You guys need to wake up. So increased profits, increased yields. So if you've seen Roundup, you might have seen Roundup or something similar in garden stores, Home Depot, something like that. All right, so disadvantages. Let me just shorten this so you have less words to write. All right, so the first thing, bioaccumulation. If something's accumulating, what does that mean? If something's accumulates, what does that mean? Growing, building up, okay? So bioaccumulation, accumulating or building up in living things. And what happens is as organisms eat these infected, like when the eagles ate the poisoned fish, they were accumulating more and more of that DDT in their bodies. We'll talk more about this. Don't worry too much about it. I just want you to write it down. Okay? Kill more than their intended target. So even if I only want to kill the little worms that are eating all of my corn crops, I might accidentally kill some of the moths and kill some of the spiders and some of the other stuff that's actually good. And especially pollinators, things that are going to help me pollinate my crops. Pollution from runoff. So some of these pesticides and herbicides can run off and pollute my waterways. And then over time, pests may evolve resistance, which is what we're going to talk about with the pesticide treadmill. We're going to do pesticide treadmill, CAFOs, and then we'll be done. I know it's been a lot of notes. So anytime we have, anytime we're killing off a bunch of organisms, right, we have the opportunity for them to evolve resistance, right, and that evolution, okay? So here are a list of the dirty dozen. These are they tested fruits and vegetables, and these are the ones that came back with the highest levels of pesticides. Apples, bell peppers, blueberries, celery, cucumbers, grapes, lettuce, nectarines, peaches, potatoes, spinach, and strawberries. Okay, these had the highest levels of pesticides, and so they recommend you buy organic. Now, do I buy these organic? No, because I'm way too cheap for that. Okay, but these are the ones they tested and have the highest levels of pesticides. Lowest levels of pesticides: asparagus, avocado, cabbage, cantaloupe, corn, eggplant, grapefruit, kiwi, mangoes, mushrooms, onion, etc. Notice, a lot of these are things you end up peeling, okay, like avocado or cantaloupe, or you don't actually eat the rind. So if you're talking about like bananas, okay, or oranges, if they have a peel and you're peeling them off, typically you don't really have to worry about pesticides because the majority of those pesticides are going to be on the outside, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, so what is the pesticide treadmill? So a treadmill, right, that little belt on the treadmill goes round and round and round. So this is a cycle. And what is the cycle? We develop pesticides, we apply them, and then some of the pests die, but then we develop resistance. Some of those pests are resistant, okay? Again, we develop new pesticides, we spray them on, some of them become resistant. And again and again and again, okay? So it's a cycle of developing new pesticides and having those pesticides develop resistance. All right, so here is one of the last things that we are going to talk about today. Something called a CAFO, okay? Concentrated animal feeding operations. And they have many animals in very, very small areas. You guys might remember at the beginning when I showed you the picture of the chickens, this one, right? This would be considered a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation. Why? Because there's lots of animals concentrated in a small area. Okay, so problems. What are some of the problems? We are going to watch 2 different video clips, and we're going to look at what these CAFOs, see if you can find any problems with them.